Welcome to today's Congressional Neuroscience Caucus briefing on 10 years of Brain Initiative funding, building on a decade of innovation. So I'm Mark Resnick, and I am a distinguished professor of, I didn't mean to read that, physiology and psychiatry at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and also a research career scientist at the Jesse Brown VA. But most importantly, I'm chair of the American Brain Coalition, and we're bringing this event to you today. The American Brain Coalition, together with the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology, the Dana Foundation, Simons Foundation, Society for Neuroscience, and Kavli Foundation, have partnered in order to make this briefing possible. The Congressional Neuroscience Caucus is chaired by Congressman Earl Blumenauer and Congressman Morgan Luttrell. We had hoped that they would be there, and they may still show up. So what's going to happen is when they show up, whoever's talking will give a signal to stop, and we let the members speak, and then you start again. Okay? All right. But I'll make their introductions right. Katie, should I do that now? Say who they are? Yeah. So Earl Blumenauer is the 3rd Congressional District in Oregon. He's a resident of Portland. Earl is also the co-chair of the House of the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus and the Congressional Bicycle Caucus. And he's been in Congress since 1996. He's been on Ways and Means, and he's promoted access for health care and environmental reform in many different ways. He's also been a champion for patients suffering from neurological and psychiatric disease, and in doing so, began the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus, which is really something that is so important to all of us. And when he comes, if he's in a markup right now, so we don't know if he'll be able to come. But if he gets a chance, I'm sure, without question, that he will be here. Congressman Morgan Luttrell is serving his first term, and he represents Texas' 8th Congressional District. So Congressman Luttrell brings a personal passion to the Neuroscience Caucus because he survived a helicopter crash in 2009 that left him with a traumatic brain injury. After retiring from the Navy, he was in for 14 years, he had got an advanced degree in applied cognition and neuroscience at the University of Texas at Dallas. So in a way, he's one of us. And his recovery from PTSD and traumatic brain injury has caused his interest and sparked his passion for neuroscience. And again, he is not here now, but when he gets here, and I think in this case it's probably when, I'll give the signal and we'll go from there. Before beginning the program, today's briefing is being recorded. However, for staffers here particularly, the recording will be turned off during the question and answer session, so feel free to say whatever the hell you want, and nobody will know, okay? I'd like to turn it over now to John Nye. And John is the director of the NIH Brain Initiative. He earned his bachelor's degree in chemistry and biology from Pomona College in Claremont, California, and his PhD in biology from Caltech in Pasadena. He was a postdoc at Caltech and at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons before starting his faculty position at Berkeley. He spent 25 plus years there, and he now oversees the long-term strategy and day-to-day operation of the groundbreaking enterprise that we call the Brain Initiative. John. You want to be me?
I can be you. I'd be happy to be you. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate these opening remarks and for all that you do. Start with thanks. Special thank you to the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus for supporting us and for sponsoring this and helping us be here to tell you this amazing story about this meteoric program we call the Brain Initiative, and to our sponsors as well. And hopefully we'll get to see Representatives Blumenauer and Luttrell, who have been tremendous supporters of what we do. We are celebrating a decade of innovation and progress funded by the BRAIN Initiative, and we're going to see some really great examples of what this has meant to us in real terms, in human lives, from our panelists. So 1 in 3 people in America are living with some kind of brain disorder. So if this were a first-year medical student class, the instructor would say, look to your left, look to your right. One of you people is going to be affected at some point in your life. I'm not going to do that. I just did it. Sorry. But what it also means in real terms is, I think it's safe to say, everybody in this room has a friend, loved one, a family member that is living with something like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, post-traumatic stress disorder, perhaps stroke, trying to recover from a stroke, traumatic brain injuries, opioid use disorder, whole range of conditions. And I'm going to guess that when you learned of that in your family member, your loved one, you probably remember that day. So 25 years ago, I was sitting in my office and my phone rang. I remember the day clearly. I couldn't tell you the date, but I remember the day clearly. My closest friend called me to tell me that he'd been just diagnosed with Parkinson's. And I felt the life go out of me. I said, oh my God, what are we going to do? And that was 25 years ago. He's still here through the miracle of medicine. He's actually receiving some of the best treatments available because he's privileged and lucky. But this is what we're fighting against. We're racing against time to find cures for folks who really need it. And this is what the BRAIN Initiative is here to do, to make new discoveries and to get them into the clinic to help people, not just adding incrementally to the great science that already is being done, but to really put a booster rocket on it so we can really get there closer. So we're doing this in a couple of different ways. We're supporting innovative science, of course, inclusive science. We want to get these riches to as many people as we can and involve the voices of folks who need it. And you're going to hear about that today. It has to be open science. Whatever we give, whatever we find, we have to give to everybody to use. And it has to be ethical. All these things are really at the core of what we do. And again, we're speeding up the pace of research to get these into folks. So you're going to hear from this panel this in a lived experience in really real terms. And I'm hoping that you will agree, together we can actually build something bigger and better to really get to where we want to be a lot faster, to obtain cures for our loved ones. Previously, I think were unimaginable, but now I think we can do it in our lifetimes. And what we've really seen here is that what was science fiction just a few years ago, it's becoming reality today. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to our moderator, Dr. Ted Abel, who's a highly distinguished neuroscientist who studies how the brain stores memories and the relevance of these really fundamental findings to humans who are living with various neurologic and neuropsychiatric disorders, specifically in autism spectrum disorders. Dr. Abel holds the Roy J. Carver Chair in Neuroscience and is the founding director of the Iowa Neuroscience Institute at the University of Iowa. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ted.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Mark. And thanks, everybody, for being here. We have heavy hitters from the SFN Council floating around, so thank you all. It's really critical. So I'm a neuroscientist, a molecular neuroscientist, and I'm also the parent of a man, Seamus, on the autism spectrum. And in December of 1999, some 3 weeks before the millennium, he was born and went home with us from Pennsylvania Hospital. And 4 days later was not taken to the breast or producing urine and took him to his pediatrician. She sent us to the CHOP NICU. It took about 10 days to stabilize him and find that probably at birth he had an intraventricular hemorrhage that thankfully was low grade. But right away I saw just such a striking environment in the CHOP NICU with these two girls who had come from Poland conjoined and were separated, Veronica and Victoria. I still remember singing along with Disney videos with them, and a patient that was found on the street in West Philadelphia and was just a patient. Just a girl. They really didn't have a name for her. And so my wife and I, Noreen, and my mom, Annie, who thankfully was a special ed teacher, and my dad, Ed, we tried to help our son Seamus navigate through life. That time in 99 and 2000, Cure Autism Now was starting the Autism Resource Exchange. I was able to be part of their board of scientific advisors and then part of their board of directors. And from that time, thinking we could collect DNA and maybe have a gene, now we have 1,000 genes, thanks to all of us, many of us in this room, Simons Foundation, Spark, NIMH, NINDS. And with the Brain Initiative, we know how those genes affect circuits. And with our son, Seamus, we can think about how those circuits affect his language development and maybe direct him to be better at German than he is at English, and have very much difficulty changing what he's doing and understanding how to navigate the world. So really seeing the impact of the Brain Initiative and of neuroscience research funded by NIMH and NINDS and NIH broadly at DOD and foundations, philanthropic foundations, has really changed our lives. It keeps us going. It enables us to keep Seamus going. He's now a junior at the University of Iowa, taking a course in German, French, and translation, not speaking much English, and not having any peer friends. So we're not exactly sure how he will navigate life. But what I'm sure is that the psychiatrists that treat him are incredible. I think I need to now pause because Mark has stood up.
And Congressman Trell has entered the room. I've already made an introduction to him, but as I mentioned, he is the co-chair of the Neuroscience Caucus and a neuroscientist, and we'd love to hear remarks from him now.
Well, I tell you what. You don't need a microphone. You don't need a microphone. Thank you for hosting. It's been quite the day in Washington, D.C. Don't ask me if I'm having fun in Washington, D.C. That's like, I've learned that you never ask a congressional member if they're having fun in Washington, D.C. But that's okay. So we are talking about the Brain Initiative. I actually heard that when I walked in the door, which is very exciting. As a neuroscientist myself, the last bastion of uncharted frontier when it comes to the brain and brain science and how we're navigating those difficult spaces and what will the brain, tell us in the future. Because when I was in grad school, my professor said, hey, what we learned in college, it was wrong. And now we know more. And now I'm 12 years out, I think, and similar saying the same things. And when it comes to the funding line, which I'm a big advocate of, I think we should be pressing the pedal forward when it comes to funding these lines of research and how our neuroscientists and our doctors and our clinicians and that space touch the human body, because every brain's different. And it's the beautiful part about the human body, right? Everybody's special because your brain is very unique. And I heard you talk about a gentleman in here I couldn't catch if he had a brain injury and now, but it sounded like at Ohio State and he's speaking 3 languages. Did I catch that correctly? Well, I have trouble speaking English sometimes because I'm from Texas, but you can appreciate where we're trying to go with that. I think once inevitably there will be this fine young man or woman that cracks the proverbial code on that source code and this gelatinous substance between our ears that contemplates thought, contemplates contemplation of thought, and takes us where we need to go. So at our level and at the NIH's level, the departments that provide functionality for our brilliant minds that are coalescing around this effort, we have to give them our utmost support. As we move forward in that generation that's beneath us, those babies that are coming up that are moving into the cyberspace, cyber realm, and they're exploring these wonderful things. How great would it be if we never had to worry about brain injury or brain disease? When you look at your mother and your father and your grandparents, and that condition is taking their life away from them, or you have a mother that brings their baby in from an injury from a motorcycle accident, you can look them in the face and say, "Don't worry, we got it. This is not a problem. We can regenerate these cells." That's what we want, and I continue to push. And I can promise you this: has sometimes presented a challenge in the congressional space to convince other people, because most people don't speak neuroscience. There's a different language. So it's always been entertaining to share with my colleagues on how important it is that we really front load and fund these efforts. But thank you very much. God bless each and every one of you. Keep up the great work, and I'll hand it off to someone much, much smarter than me. I know who that would be, young sir. Or I can keep going all day. I don't know how to.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Congressman. Thanks for all your support in the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus. Thank you. Really grateful personally. Yes. So let me begin to introduce our panel. We really have an extraordinary panel that ranges from a neurosurgeon to an engineer to a neurologist and to a patient and his wife. And so I think we'll have a chance to see the impact of the new therapies coming from the Brain Initiative really firsthand. I'm going to begin with some brief introductions and then let Dr. Mayberg introduce her patient and his wife. So Natia Satana has joined us from the University of California at Los Angeles. She's an assistant professor in residence in the Department of Neurosurgery, and she's brought some of her toys or instruments. So we will have fun in seeing them in a little bit. Chris Rozelle is here. He's a principal investigator on a brain grant. He's the Julian T. Hightower Chaired Professor of Electrical and Chemical Engineering at Georgia Tech. Chris, we're really glad that you're here. And then Helen Mayberg is a brain principal investigator with Chris and a collaborative grant. She is at Mount Sinai, a professor of neurotherapeutics. And I'll turn it over to her, where Dr. Mayberg can introduce her patient, John Nelson, and his wife, Barb.
Well, welcome all of you, and it's really a pleasure and honor to be able to share our science and let you know what we were able to accomplish with our collaborative grant, the Brain Initiative. But I really want to introduce Subject 812. That's how I have referred to him for the last few years, and it is beyond a personal accomplishment to be able to sit next to my patient and his wife as a colleague, as a collaborator, and have him tell you what this journey was like with us in our grant to actually get him from the place he was to the place he is now, which is here with all of you.
Thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here. I wanted to start off first by that beautiful moment that John just had, talking about his friend with Parkinson's 25 years ago, and that heartwarming response that he had. So everybody think about a neighbor, a colleague, a friend, and think about tomorrow finding out that they are diagnosed with Parkinson's, they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's, they're diagnosed with breast cancer. And that immediate feeling that you have what you just saw there, right? You have warmth, you have compassion, you have empathy, and it's beautiful. And I'll give you a personal example of that is my mother was recently diagnosed with breast cancer, very, very, very early stage breast cancer. And I was talking to her yesterday, and I said, "Mom, how you doing?" And she said, I'm doing really good. I just opened up my present. And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "I have a group of friends, and they put together a bag of presents, 30 presents, and they want me to open one once a day." And it's amazing to have this support. I have so much food at my house I don't know what to do with. I have people lined up to take me to medical treatments. And so this is exactly what diseases and conditions and disorders should be treated like. These are things that people did not ask for that you should absolutely have sadness, empathy for. I unfortunately have the opposite, which millions and millions of people in this country have, which is I suffer from mental illness. So once again, something that I did not ask for and is completely looked upon by society differently. And so to explain that, I want to walk you through my journey and what it's like to suffer from mental illness in this country and the absolute life-saving measures that this wonderful woman and her team and the Brain Initiative can do to save lives. So about a decade ago, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. It is not what you think and see in the movies. It can literally be anybody. I was very successful in my working career. I had the stereotypical, what does he have to be depressed for? High-functioning person, extroverted person. And I was really, really, really sick. Started to get very sick. Went to the doctor. They told me, you have MDD, is what they called it. Didn't make any sense. And I read up, and I did. And that was a battle that was very, very, very silent in the beginning because of what I mentioned before, that stigma, people not understanding, people judging. The reason people die in this country from suicide, die by suicide, is because of that judgment. They do not understand what's going on with them. Their lives are being wrecked. they are being judged by society, and they die. It's that simple. So my case was very simple of I have multiple interventions that I can do. Started this 10 years ago, like I said. I will say there's 10 different medical interventions that you could go through. I went through over 10 medications, every single treatment that you can imagine from a therapeutic standpoint, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, you name it, I've done it. I even did something called psychodrama. I tried everything. The only thing that kept happening was I kept getting sicker and sicker. And so people don't understand these diseases. So I'm going to explain it to you, and I'm going to make you feel a little uncomfortable. And I'm okay with that because people need to change their opinions of people who suffer from mental illness. They didn't ask for this. My day-to-day ended up becoming consumed with wanting to die. The best vacation in the world for me wasn't going on vacation. It was lying to my family so that I could go upstairs, wrap myself into a big comforter, turn the lights out, blast my fan, and sleep. A phenomenal day for me was sleeping only 18 hours and not 20 hours and showering. If I could shower, huge win. Absolutely massive, massive win. I go to my first residential treatment facility to stay alive. And I go to this facility, and the only answer that I had was death. But death had to come with being able to take care of my family. So I couldn't die by suicide because guess what? When you have these maniacal mental health conditions, the entire goal of the disease, as I said, is to kill you. The entire goal of cancer is to kill you. How you die with these diseases, major depressive disorder, for instance, with me, doesn't provide life insurance for my family, right? It's so maniacal that after it's done, it laughs at me after death. So I die, my family gets ostracized, blamed, and they're financially ruined. This is what it's like to live with these conditions. I am in my first residential treatment facility. I despise snakes. I hate them with a passion. I was trying to find a snake so that the snake could bite me and I could die. Because that was success to me. That figured out, it answered every problem that I had. My kids had a dad who died in an accident. My wife gets to start over, right? Please start over with somebody who's not sick. And they get to financially get taken care of, and I don't have to suffer, right? So that's what this is like. The entire time I'm going through this medical journey, the only thing that continues is I just get sicker and sicker. I come home, I do a partial hospitalization plan, I do an intensive outpatient program. Every single time I submit for insurance, guess what I get? I get a denial letter back from my insurance company, and guess what it says? You are not medically necessary for this. So every single step that I'm taking in this process to stay alive, I'm being told, we actually want you to die. So 4 times typically is what I'd have to do for submitting again and again to get approval for these procedures. I did something called transcranial magnetic stimulation 36 times. I have to go to a psychiatrist's office, sit in a chair, get this procedure done, come home. Nothing worked. I had to go get electroconvulsive therapy, shock therapy. Let me give you guys another analogy. Would you ever, with somebody with cancer, judge them, blame them, shame them, ostracize them for getting radiation or getting chemotherapy? You'd be pretty much the worst person in the world for doing that, correct? That's all that society does for mental illness. The gold standard treatment currently right now for severe depression, treatment resistant, which is unfortunately what I had, is electroconvulsive therapy. It didn't do anything for me, but I tried it. It actually was awful. I had to go under anesthesia in 2022 15 times. That's what severe mental illness looks like. I lost significant memory, short-term and long-term. It still sticks with me to this day. I kept trying. And so my 2 biggest, most severe symptoms for me towards the end of this were constant suicidal ideation, constant. It was the opposite of upsetting to me. It was actually pleasurable. because I felt the darkness was good, right? The other one was literally feeling it in every portion of my body. So let me get you guys to understand what that means. So everybody's had the aches and shakes from a fever and a cold, correct? So that physical sensation that you have, imagine that, but replace it with death and dread, literally circulating through your body. Every single portion of my blood, I felt it constantly. Physically draining, physically exhausting. And I literally thought I was 100% gone. And the only fortunate reason that I wasn't is I had this tiny little piece, that sliver that was holding me on. I am not better than anybody who has died by suicide. That is 100% the goal of serious mental illness, is to take your life, 100%. I just fortunately had it, if 10 is the most severe, 10 is death, I was at a 9.9. And fortunately, I was introduced to these absolutely incredible physicians, engineers, clinicians, scientists at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. And I didn't know if it was going to work, but I was essentially what's called treatment-resistant depression. And you have the ability to go there. I met all of their criteria. And they said, all right, we're good. We're going to do brain surgery on you. And a lot of people would say to me, well, that's a big deal, brain surgery. I didn't care. I literally, like, when you think about the thought process of going to your dentist to get your teeth cleaned, that's how much anxiety I had about going and doing an 8-hour brain surgery where they wake you up halfway through. Couldn't care less. And the reason being is I didn't care if I died, right? If I'm on the table and I die, sweet. This is best case scenario. I didn't think I'd get better, but at least it was another attempt to try to stay there. And I wake up from this procedure, and you can see, to explain it, I right here in my chest have a pacemaker. The pacemaker is essentially the battery. I have a cord that wraps up my neck here. You can see my 2 little funny dots on the top of my head. I have 2 electrodes that go down into 2 very specific portions of my brain. I have 22.5 million electrical pulses of electricity going to those 2 sections of my brain constantly and instantaneously cured. 0 depression, in remission from depression the moment this device was turned on. So 2 things. I'm absolute proof that in the most severe form of major depressive disorder, I have an electrical deficiency. That's all I have. The stigma is so incredibly strong that my first thought when I got up and I wasn't sick was, oh my God, something was wrong with me. Like I wasn't nuts. Like something literally was wrong with me. That's how pervasive the stigma is. I have electricity. That's my medicine. It's the only medicine that works. And I am not sick. It doesn't make any sense. Like I feel like I'm living a 60 Minutes episode every day. This is August 22nd of 2022. So I'm still only a year and a half in. New stuff happens to me all the time. Dr. Mayberg told me after the surgery, you need to rehab your brain. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm not sick. This is amazing. What do you mean? And I'll give you an example of, once again, her brilliance. She's never been wrong in anything she's told me. I woke up 6 weeks later, and I didn't feel good. And when I tell you how immediate this was for me, that the actual device working, I couldn't shower. Like I said, I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't have friends over. I couldn't walk my dog around the block. I couldn't do anything. And the day I got home, I walked my dog around the block with my family. I had friends over for a fire. I hadn't had a fire with friends outside in forever, right? That's how immediate this works. 6 weeks goes by. I wake up and I'm sad. Completely plummeted. Completely. I call Dr. Fagui, who's the main psychiatrist. I say, Doc, did you guys turn this off? I'm freaked out. Like, what's going on? Is this part of the clinical trial? And they'll talk about the complexities of this, but he wrote back and said, nope, you're good. We'll talk to you on Monday. And I talked to them, and told me something that really expressed to me something very simple to explain the disease versus what do you have to be depressed for? You have a great family, great job, great kids, your standard stigma line. And that was that I had to learn how to live with the emotion of sadness. And it didn't make sense until that time. And I got it. I was like, oh, okay, so you have happiness, you have sadness, you have anger, you have human emotions that come in your body, they leave your body. That's just the natural cycle of life. And so if you take that natural reaction or that emotion, if 10 is severe, let's say a sadness comes in at a 3, it's maybe gone in the afternoon, right? Maybe it replaces with happiness. The disease of depression, to explain it to everybody, is it's at a 5 to a 10, 10 being death, and it doesn't leave your body. That's what the disease is. I did not think that I was going to survive. I didn't think that I'd be in remission of depression. Now I have to learn how to live with sadness because it's traumatic. Like feeling that emotion is absolutely so difficult for me to do, and I'm still working on it. But the differences pre and post surgery, I cannot begin to tell you. My voice is different. My skin color is different. My will to want to be around people is different. Everything. I'm just excited for life. And I can't begin to tell you without funding initiatives, without funding the Brain Initiative to provide them the ability to give funding to these incredibly smart people to cure these diseases, these maniacal, horrific, horrible diseases that do not have a cure, you have to do it. I mean, there are millions of people in this country that are suffering. And so for those that are here from the staffers and Congress folks, the reason you don't hear about it, and they're not knocking your door down about it, is because of the stigma. There's multiple people in this room that suffer from some form of severe mental illness, guaranteed. That's how horrific this stigma is. And so if we can do the right thing and provide the right funding to these people to put it in the hands of these absolutely brilliant freaks, they will save life. You'll save millions and millions of lives. It's that simple. So I'm extremely lucky for both of them. And then the other thing that I will say, the biggest unmet needs that I have seen in this space are, you have no idea who's suffering. Zero idea. I'm the last person that people thought would be suffering from severe mental illness. It doesn't show up in any certain way or form at all. So you don't know. So be kind, be empathetic. It's that simple. You can literally save a life by purely educating yourself. You know, my mom with the meals and with the gifts, that's how it should be. There is not a single person in the millions of people who suffer from serious mental illness who have 30 gifts that have been brought to them by friends open daily. It just doesn't happen, right? That's the difference. The other main thing is caregiver. I had zero understanding of a caregiver other than the fact of me in 30 years taking my mom to CVS to get her medication. That's what I thought a caregiver was. The only person worse than the person going through the hell that is these diseases is the caregiver. You know, I had to see this amazing woman's life be shattered and watch it. And it wasn't me, right? It was the disease. I call it a disease. I understand it's a disorder condition. It's a disease in my mind. But I had to watch what it did to her. And to think that that stigma not only impacts the people suffering, but the people who are caring for the people suffering is something that absolutely needs to change in this world, not just this country, in this world. And so I will end with this by saying, you know, when you all look back to your partners, right, when you met earlier in life, you know, it's the butterflies, it's the excitement, it's the fun dinners, it's the, you know, just love spending time with yourself, with each other. And you don't really think, you know, what are they going to be like if things go like super sideways, right? You don't think at the time when you're courting, I don't know if that's the right word, when you're doing that in the beginning, you're not thinking about what's it going to be like when you've been up for 2 days and your kids are crying nonstop, right? How's that behavior going to be? how about if you spend a decade wanting to die every second of the day, and your partner has to take care of you, your family, your life, and truly keep me alive. And clearly, I've absolutely married out of my league, and I've married out of the best person that I know. I'm so incredibly fortunate to have her here, and I'd love to introduce my wife, Barbara.
Go ahead, Barbara. You could tell us about your experience as a caretaker.
He's going to be hard to follow, so I'm going to read to you. I wrote just to help you understand what it's like to live with someone who suffers from a severe mental illness. So I've been married to John for 19 years. We have 3 children together, 11, 13, and 15. I've spent half of my life with John, and my children have spent most of their life with a father who has treatment-resistant depression. So when asked to recount what it's like to care for someone who suffers from this, I have to think back to the beginning, but there is no beginning. Because unlike other diseases, there's not a day that you're healthy and then one day you're not. Depression's slow, sneaky, maniacal, and insidious. It's progressive, and untreated or mistreated, it will metastasize. And because one of the only ways for someone to see depression in another person is through their behaviors, it can look a lot like poor choices or a flaw of character, rather than what we know now, that it is a deficiency in electricity in a specific part of the brain. So when I first met John, I fell in love with his kindness, generosity, sense of humor, and this disease slowly tried to take all that away from me and my family. When he was sick, you could see it in the way he walked, talked, and in the color of his skin. His voice was different. His life and energy were literally being drained from his body. And when I try to look back, I have to think really hard about what it was like, because our life is so different now. Since August 22nd, 2022, when I got my husband back and my children got their father back. But when I do think of what it's like, there's 3 words that come to mind. It's unpredictable, it's secretive, and it's costly. So to care for someone with a mood disorder such as depression means you never really know what to expect. You learn to have little to no expectations of your partner. So will he get out of bed today? If he does, will he stay out of bed? Will he, attempt to do the thing that the disease is really wanting him to do? Will he take a shower? Will he come down to dinner? Will he cry at dinner? Or if he does the small chore or errand that I ask him to do, will he do it? He won't. But if he does, he'll be much worse for it after. The simplest activities would just drain him for days. So in 2019, he entered his first residential treatment facility with the sole goal of trying to stay alive, leaving me alone with our kids for 4 weeks. I lied to my children about their father's whereabouts. I cried myself to sleep after long, anxious days, wondering what life would look like when he came home, if he came home. And when he did return home, he entered a partial hospitalization program, then stepped down to outpatient program. He was out of work on short-term disability, which pays pennies on the dollar. And so I enrolled in a postmaster's certificate program so that I could put myself in a position to earn more money than I could with my master's in education, so that I would be able to financially support my family if I needed to. 2 years later, I completed the program, passed my board exam, and then 4 days after that, John told me with tears streaming down his face that the persistent thoughts of suicide were leading him back to another residential treatment facility. He'd been holding it together as best he could so that I could finish school. The only consistency in our life for a decade was failure. No medical intervention worked for John, nothing. By rough estimate, we spent probably $150,000 in costs trying to treat his depression. That's while having great health insurance. Insurance coverage for mental illness services and interventions in our country is broken. The disease was not only slowly killing my husband, it was also destroying our financial stability. And at the beginning, John not only hid the disease from me, but from himself. See, the stigma around mental illness is so strong that it keeps people silent, keeps them in denial, and keeps them from seeking early medical care and interventions. And watching him suffer and deteriorate while having to be quiet about it just makes the whole situation worse. Over the years, luckily, John became more comfortable with telling the truth about what he was going through, and I'm so grateful for that. Because of his honesty, we were able to get support from family and friends. You know, having friends and family be able to help me take care of the kids, to be a steady, loving presence for them, to take him to medical treatments, and just check in on us. And I have no doubt that if we had not been so lucky to participate in this clinical trial, that my life would look nothing like it does now. I would be a widow, my kids wouldn't have a father, and the disease would have won. So following the surgery, John was doing well so fast. He told me that Dr. Mayberg wanted me to share my observations, but I could not do it right away. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was guarded, afraid of being let down again, afraid of losing my husband to the disease of depression again. I didn't want to write her and jinx it, but I finally did. And this is my email to Dr. Mayberg. John asked me to share with you what I've noticed since his surgery. He asked me last week, but I've been so reluctant, afraid I would jinx it. He's doing so well, it's almost too good to be true. So here are the concrete things I've noticed. He's keeping a normal sleep schedule. He naps some in the days post-surgery, but in the last week, he hasn't really slept during the day. He was able to coach the boys' hockey game this weekend, 4 games over 2 very long days, and was totally fine today. In the past, he would have been in bed all day and miserable after expending so much energy. He was irritated about a work situation, but did not perseverate about it like he would have in the past. He's smiling more, his energy is lighter, the whole house feels lighter. He's socializing, talking to neighbors, making plans to see friends. He is so extroverted, and the last few years he was so withdrawn, I almost forgot how much he loves people. Honestly, I haven't seen this John in so many years, it feels like a miracle. I hope this info helps you. I'm humbled and grateful. The same day, Dr. Mayberg wrote me back. Oh my gosh. And this was what she wrote. So pleased to hear this progress from your perspective. Still early days, but going in the right direction. Thanks for the update. Remember, it's a new thing for you as well. So go one day at a time yourself to get your own new rhythm. Now, it's just an example of the comprehensive and amazing care that John and myself have received from the doctors at Mount Sinai. So on August 22nd, 2022, I got my husband back. My children got their father back. I want to thank all of those in this room who provided the funding to the BRAIN Initiative to make that happen. And I urge you to continue supporting the BRAIN Initiative and to continue advancing the science that saved my husband's life. Thank you.
John and Barb, thank you for the courage to share your story. A number of people in tears. As I was saying, when I saw your video, I couldn't finish watching it. There's a great, amazing YouTube video that John posted. We're so grateful your courage will help others and others suffering from disease and their caregivers and parents and children understand what mental illness is and how to change the way we view it in society beyond an awareness to an acceptance. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me turn it over to Dr. Mayberg. If she could tell us about her adventure, really, over the past decades, exploring treatment-resistant depression and how, particularly, the BRAIN Initiative has really changed that in recent years.
Thank you, John and Barbara. It's a little, there's so many stories of so many patients. For me, in this discovery, this line of work, which started in first patient in this time of year in 2003, and John is actually patient number 60. He's patient number 18 of our BRAIN Initiative grant. He was the 8th of the second cohort. We had 2 cohorts, one at Emory and one at Mount Sinai, and he was number 8. And so again, you may not have heard this story, or maybe you have. We've told it numerous times with different patients, and each patient is their own special person because we're all individuals. But individuals get depression. individuals are not depression. And I think that's what we're hearing here. I want to make a couple of points because I'm a neurologist. What's a neurologist doing studying depression? When you listen to that story, all the neuroscientists should go, and why is this a Brain Initiative grant? And what is an engineer doing here? Because everybody's individual story is about the output of a circuit in the brain. And it was 20 years ago that we did the first case, making sort of an educated guess about the importance of Area 25, the subcallosal cingulate. That wasn't a guess. That was 15 years of NIH funding before that, before a Brain Initiative, in the decade of the brain, to actually map out the circuits of depression, to take the chance that depression was no different from Parkinson's. It was a circuit disorder. We didn't have any tools. When I trained in neurology, we had to wait a week to get a CT scan to figure out where the stroke was, to see that our attending wasn't as smart as we thought they were, because the stroke wasn't where we thought it was by the exam, but the picture told us. We suddenly had tools that we could take pictures of the brain in action. We could map something as ethereal, as poison in your body, your inability to even walk your dog. Does that have localization? Of course it does. You just have to see it a very different way. You have to see it through the lens of a neurologist, not a psychiatrist. Freud was a neurologist. He just didn't have a tool. He didn't think you could map it because he didn't have a tool. We had tools. Once we had tools, we could get a really basic map of the brain. And we could study where patients who could get better, patients who couldn't get better, what changed in the brain. We could articulate grossly, not like my colleague Suzanne Haber with, the real anatomy of the brain, a surrogate of the brain, but good enough to get patterns. And patterns good enough that when you meet a patient who's suffering like John, like all the patients that we see who stop responding to everything, there's a place in the brain. We could leverage tools. We could leverage what was known in Parkinson's disease. They'd already worked out the details. How do you put an electrode in someone's brain in exactly the right place? Neurosurgeons are magical. They can hit anything if you give them the tool. And we had the spot, we put it in, we turned it on, and there was this lifting. Everybody describes it a different way. It's metaphorical. That's not quantitative. That's not a Brain Initiative grant. But with a Brain Initiative grant, we had a lot of patients who were doing well, but we couldn't scale it for a company to take it to the masses. So we had to figure it out, what we were doing, even though we knew we were doing it right. We needed a grant to figure out the science, to reverse engineer what we'd actually done. We didn't have tools, and then we had tools. And when companies partnered with the NIH to provide new tools, prototype devices that we could use, and that we could build teams, a new culture of research, so I could engage a colleague like Chris Rizzo, a neuroengineer. What am I doing with engineers? I can barely deal with the psychiatrists I have to deal with. It's a whole other language I'm going to have to learn. That as you get imaging scientists, electrophysiologists, people who are good at math, people who do it engineering, people who can take care of patients, people who can figure out and decode the brain signal, and tools become available. And you have opportunity because NIH and the Brain Initiative enables a program that lets all these people come together and work together and kind of figure it out in real time. We knew how to get somebody well. That's not news to me. I have no idea what we did, and we had tools to decode the brain, and that's what we did. So now we know what that first effect was by measuring it in the operating room. And we learned that the first effect is not the late effect. How do we do that? Because Shankar Alagappan, who's Chris Rizzo's postdoc, who's in the audience, they worked together and really applied a logic with machine learning of the electrophysiology to decode, not maybe it'll work, knowing it worked, what is well. And once you can kind of figure out what is well, then you can look and see how well evolves. And what is it to evolve to be well and to be able to live a life and not look backwards? That's enabled by scientists. Every time I hear this story, no one cares about me telling the story. You care about John telling the story. What you care about is that our team figures out what we did so other people can do it. We need to figure out what we did so we understand and be able to go forward and do it better and easier and to get it to more people.
Dr. Mager, thank you very much. Can we turn to Chris Rozelle, from Georgia Tech? And if Chris, if you could comment on the challenges of connecting with a neurologist and a neurosurgeon and a psychiatrist as well, the whole team, and really why that's been critical for developing these new treatments for depression.
Sure, I'd be happy to. As you're hearing, a lot of work over many years has helped localize neurologic and psychiatric disorders to specific circuits in the brain, and it's been going on for decades. But the Brain Initiative really, as John, I think, said well earlier, John and I, put a booster rocket on that by pulling together interdisciplinary teams. Because the thing that we're dealing with here is the most complicated system we know in the universe, the human brain. It's beyond any one person's understanding. As much as I love and appreciate Helen's genius, it's beyond her understanding, as she says, to even know what it was exactly that they were doing. So we needed to pull together different expertises, engineers, clinicians of different types, right? And there are actually very few places that you can go for the types of funding that you need to pull together these types of interdisciplinary teams. Now, why is that important? I think we heard this in what John Nelson described earlier. You saw he didn't really have the language to describe what he was going through. He just felt sick. And even when he was in recovery, right, he wasn't sure sometimes if he was relapsing, if he was just feeling anxiety, what was happening to him, right? This is all very subjective, right? And psychiatry is one of the few medical disciplines where you can't actually measure the part of the body that you're trying to treat. You can only talk to the patient. And with all due respect, John, it's a phenotype of the disease that you often don't have the right language to describe what's going on inside. And so what we try to do is build data science and AI algorithms to quantify all this, right? To reverse engineer what Helen and her team are doing so that we can try and give a basic stethoscope to the field of psychiatry and pull it into the 21st century, not where it's living right now. And that's crucial for trying to take this beyond one patient or the 20 patients that we did and to a therapy that can help millions of people. So again, I just want to call out Shankar Alagappan. Shankar, if you can raise your hand. If you want to see what the data looks like that we look at, Shankar's research faculty at Georgia Tech with us there, and he has some data on a laptop that he can show you about what it looks like when we actually examine the brain of a patient when they're in recovery and they go to their psychiatrist and say, "Doc, I think I might be sick again." And we can now look at what's changing in their brain and say, "No, you're fine. Just chill out a little bit. This is all going to be good," right? Or sometimes to say, "Listen, I know that you're feeling okay right now, but your brain is actually throwing us a signal that you're headed toward relapse. So let's give a warning to your psychiatric team that we might be dealing with a pretty serious issue in a few weeks, and we should be intervening now before you're in the hospital and dealing with an acute issue." Those are the sort of ways that I think technology is going to help us turn these from disorders that we don't understand to diseases that we can treat with precision, with electricity as medicine, and why it's so important that the Brain Initiative has pulled together people like engineers and psychiatrists and neurologists and surgeons, even though we speak very different languages, and that takes time and is painful to learn, but to get those groups of people into a room so we can make the types of advances that we need.
Chris, thank you so much. Let's turn to Natia Sultana, who's at UCLA. Natia is a neuroscientist and engineer, and can you tell us about how the Brain Initiative funding has advanced your research, particularly how you developed novel technologies, many of which are in front of you as we speak, for studying the human brain?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. Yes, I'm on the other coast at UCLA, and is it on? Hello? Oh, is this one? Is there another button right here? Yeah, there's another.
There you go.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now you
All right, cool. I'm at UCLA and because of the Brain Initiative, formed a similar team of neurosurgeons, neurologists, engineers, neuroscientists, psychiatrists to basically take advantage of existing technology to integrate with wearables so that we can study natural behavior in the real world. And this is a big bottleneck in neuroscience because historically we've been studying behaviors in these very constrained settings, laying in a scanner or in the clinic, and the tools and the treatments don't translate, right? So we want to study patients in their natural everyday environments, and we did this with patients who have post-traumatic stress disorder. So we used a similar approach. Our first 2 patients were combat veterans with severe treatment-resistant PTSD, meaning they tried every, a treatment out there and nothing was working. Our first patient has been about 2 years in the trial and is in remission now for about 1.5 years since the stimulation, started. And he describes his experience as, before the trial as, passing out on the floor of Target and waking up thinking he was in battle, like all of a sudden being taken back to his combat time. And once this treatment started, he describes it as sort of a washing over effect, where he felt the trigger, he experienced the trigger and felt the tendency to flash back, but it sort of washed over him and stopped. And so he was able to go see the fireworks at Disneyland for the first time with his children, and all these experiences that he's sharing with us has really opened my eyes in terms of the impact that this research can have. As a neuroscientist, it's been quite life-changing, and the Brain Initiative has done that. And so the other part of it is developing the next generation tools. So the tools that we're developing are for the next phase to be able to treat with more precision in naturalistic environments, behaviors, everyday behaviors, and in multiple brain regions, because this is a network, circuit disorder that we're dealing with here. So we have an implant, which you're welcome to come see later, which is the smallest of its kind. The original, the one we have that can do what this one does, you have to roll it on a cart. It's so big. So this can record from hundreds of single cells in the brain. It can record from 256 different locations or channels. It can stimulate with precision, millisecond precision in terms of multiple, locations. So it's like, the dream device that we want to be able to take to the next generation of patients. And then we have them connected to electrodes as well as an externalized version, which we've actually used to record single brain cells while a patient was walking in their hospital room. That kind of discovery and ability when I was in grad school is just simply unheard of. Like for me, I just never imagined that I would be living to be able to see this kind of work, and now also see and hear the stories from the patients that are impacted by this kind of technology. And the Brain Initiative really did that. My lab actually started 10 years ago, so I'm the same age as the Brain Initiative, so to speak, and has been enjoying working in this space. So thank you all for your support.
Thanks, Natia, and thanks, everyone. What I'm going to do is ask a general discussion question, but if folks in the room could think about their own questions, we'll have a chance. We should have plenty of time for everyone to ask questions that they would like to. What I'd like to open up to all the panelists is to talk about what the next steps might be and how the Brain Initiative is critical to that progress. As many of you know, Brain Initiative funding has dropped this year quite substantially, and so the idea of thinking about what the impact would be if we were to lose Brain Initiative funding is another thing that we need to think about and discuss. So if you could think about the next steps and what's critical for those, that would be great, and feel free to chime in.
The way I see it, we've done all of this work, and John and Barbara needed a moonshot, right? They needed something dramatic to get their family back better. There are millions of people in this country that need a moonshot. So I'm grateful that John and Barbara's family is repaired, but there are millions more that need something more than bespoke therapy. As the parent of a child with severe depression, my family needs a moonshot, right? You can't get to the moon with a paper plane, right? We need a rocket. We're building rockets. Even if you have a rocket, you can't get to the moon without a map. And it's been decades of research by scientists and clinicians building the maps, of these circuits and where we need to go. We've got the rockets. They're on the launch pad. They're filled with fuel, maps in hand. And right now, they're sitting on the launch pad, right? There's still a gap between what we can do in a bespoke therapy in an academic lab and scaling this to the people that need it, right? Which is an access issue, is an economic development issue, it's a social justice issue, right? We have the ability to do this and to transform how we treat brain disorders, and we're right on the cusp, right? So as far as I'm concerned, it is transformative and a responsibility that we have to keep going with the work that has been done up to this point. So we don't leave this rocket sitting on the launch pad and millions of people waiting without hope right now for cures that would not come without the BRAIN initiative.
I can add something. To build on the space analogy, it's like building the best, most advanced telescope and then not using it to look at space. That's pretty much the point we're at. Except this isn't space, right? This is people. This is patients. This is their lives. And so it would be a waste in my mind to stop now. We're finally at that point to build momentum and really make a difference, I think.
One thing that I'd like to add to that is I attended a conference in November, and I'm sitting there with a bunch of employers and insurance companies talking about mental health costs. We're clearly in a mental health crisis, and somebody said on the stage, the only things that are certain in life are death taxes and mental health coverage, mental health costs continuing to rise every year and year and year. So people are pretty much given up in regards to how are we going to fix this. It's so simple. You have to provide funding to groups like Brain Initiative to figure out how to cure these horrific diseases. That's one. The other is an absolute massive campaign about the stupidity of the stigma of mental illness. Because guess what? That gets people into help, to get help earlier. The reason costs are so high is because people don't want to go get help because they have no idea what's going on and they don't want to be labeled or shamed or judged. It's a two-step process. So stigma and let's get these things cured by giving money to these fantastically intelligent people that will literally save lives, millions and millions of lives.
Helen, go ahead.
So I'm going to take a slightly different tact. I think that it isn't just, leaving the rocket at the launch pad. It sort of is like leaving the game in the bottom of the ninth with the bases loaded. And I think that, we build these teams. We've been throwing around metaphors all day as we've been on the Hill. And, it is, these teams are jazz bands. You just don't it's not a bunch of pickup people on the street. You assemble experts together. You got to learn to feel each other, to hear each other's way of solving a problem, of tolerating differences in style and kind of all aspects of work, much less, trying to hobble through each other's language. But once you get that, you just don't break up the band. And that's like kind of one. And then it's a lot of work to build these groups. Everyone does it in their own institution. It's hard. There's like a constant entropy that is there that tries to pull these teams apart. And we all have the experience of trying to hold a good team together. I think the other thing, though, that is really important that the BRAIN Initiative can do is to actually work to how to bring the complex to more simple. That as we build the most amazing tools that get the most information, how do we take the necessary and sufficient, because part of scaling is simplifying, that, 50 engineers on one patient with, a month in the hospital, it's never going to scale, but it is a magnificent proof of concept. And that how do we get to where, as we work with one prototype machine, take it to the second prototype machine, take it to a commercial machine, so that actually it not only moves across the scientific replicability, but also gets to where it's accessible to more people at a lower cost. Who's supposed to figure that out? The people who know the complex part of it are in the best position to figure out what part of it can be simplified. So it isn't just that hand it off to industry. No, the irony is industry will do a clinical trial in depression and they don't have the readout. But they'll know how to do the targeting well, and we'll cross our fingers. How do we actually do the work to make it so these things can scale, that we partner with industry, that we do not just what scientists do, but that we partner in the new world order of how science informs commerce, and that we all work together, because that's how we get it to patients, that we can't do this alone in our lab. It has to start in the labs. It has to start in these big labs.
Maybe I can chime in and beyond the analogies, just to be very concrete, we spent the last 10 years training a new type of workforce. We've trained researchers now that are somewhere between an engineer and a scientist and a physician, right? They don't fit cleanly into one of those boxes, and that's been tremendously difficult, right? It's taken a lot of time and investment, but we have this transdisciplinary workforce now, right, that's able to work on these types of problems. And you certainly don't want to lose a generation of this workforce that we've just spent all of this time and money building by not giving a pathway for this type of interdisciplinary, technology-driven, complicated work to continue.
Let me just take a minute to thank everybody before we turn off the video and can have some questions. The courage to speak, John and Barb, is tremendous, and we're grateful. And for the scientists, it's amazing to think that we talked about going from bench to bedside, but to go from bench to bedside to the world is absolutely incredible, and to make a difference.
From lab to life.
Lab to life. That's it. There you go. That's yeah, outstanding. The one thing, we've thanked a lot of people. But as I look around, I see staffers here, staff in Congress, but also staff at NIH. And everyone may not realize the extraordinary work that you do to make this possible, to enable our grants to be funded and reviewed and discussed and critiqued so that we're doing the best science we can possibly do. We're all grateful. Decades and decades of experience here. And thank you for all of your guidance and your support. And thank you all to the Congress for supporting us and helping to fund us and make this possible.